So, this question, like I say, the passage is on 481. In this section entitled Reason and Philosophy, Nietzsche presents two main criticisms of philosophical reason. And I should point out here that they're related but distinct from one another, and that's the way I tried to present them to you. Nietzsche claims, quote, the other idiosyncrasy, that should be your clue that it's the second one, the other idiosyncrasy of the philosophers is no less dangerous. It consists in mistaking the last for the first. Now, when I discuss this, I use my cat as an example, and feel free to use my examples, by the way. They're there for you to use. So what I'm asking you to do is basically, it's about a page and a half of text. What I'm asking you to do is analyze what Nietzsche could mean by this idiosyncrasy. So present the idiosyncrasy, discuss how it's an idiosyncrasy, and just generally discuss it. Right. So those are the two things. Here's the idiosyncrasy. This is why Nietzsche claims it's idiosyncratic. Right. So 481 is where that passage is from. And then, finally, number 6, the last of the Nietzsche questions, discuss Nietzsche's distinction between healthy morality and what he would call an anti-natural morality presented in the section Morality as Anti-Nature. Now, what I want you to do in making this distinction is be very clear about actually making the distinction. I mean, that sounds really normal to say, but nonetheless, right? Here's one element of it, here's another element of it, and here's how they're distinct. So really, it's kind of a three-part question. Premise, thought object one, thought object two, and distinguishing between them. Now, to help you out, what Nietzsche has done on your page 489 to 490 is given you sort of a principle. I mean, a lot of this question relates to the whole section where Nietzsche is slowly building an argument and actually giving you not so much examples, but at least thought experiments to follow. But it's in that section 4. Oh, quiet, Sheldon. My cat's crying at me. He wants it. Anyhow, on page 49, in section 4, it reads, I reduce principle to formula. Every naturalism in morality, that is, every healthy morality, is dominated by an instinct of life. Some commandment of life is fulfilled by a determinate canon of shalt and shalt not. Some inhibition and hostile element on the path of life is thus removed. Anti-natural morality, that is, almost every morality which has so far been taught, revered, and preached, turns conversely against the instincts of life. It is a condemnation of these instincts, now secret, now outspoken, now, and impudent. Right? Now, that principle should help you answer that question. He just reduces it to a principle so that you can make the distinction between the two kinds of morality. I gave you examples in the video lecture, and you should be able to come up with your own examples to help illustrate. So that's a good way to go about answering the question, is to illustrate using examples. Actually, in my own research on Nietzsche, I find that Nietzsche makes almost no sense unless you relate him to something that's particular and something that you can experience. Right. So so my own research focuses on sort of a chain analysis of the city of Detroit. Right. So it's Nietzsche's moral position, just in the context of a particular crisis, starts to make all sorts of sense. Right. So that passage that I quoted for you was on page 489 to 490 of your portable Nietzsche, and those are the questions. Right. Well, it's been an interesting semester. I hope you've managed to take a lot from this course, or at least something, right? I'm going to be repetitive here because it's my job to be repetitive. My job is to be repetitive. Be sure to break down these questions into their constituent parts, as I've just done. Be sure to answer them fully, because still, even on the second midterm, I was noticing part 1 complete, part 2 ignored in some cases. Right? Some of you did absolutely fantastic, and thank you. A number of your exams were just a pleasure to read. This exam is due on August 17th by 11:55. That's 5 minutes to midnight. So I tried to give you as much time the whole day to work on these. You're submitting your responses via Moodle. This should be old hat to you, but I'll repeat. Actually, I've solved my WordPerfect problem, so if you've got WordPerfect, I can actually open that, but I do prefer .doc, .docx, or PDF, or even TXT if you're old school formats. One more thing I should mention. The forums, I'm going to close those at the same time as the exam is due. So if you've not been participating or would just like to beef up that participation portion of your grade, last call is August 17th by 5 to midnight, right? So that's 10% of your grade that you still have control over, and hopefully you'll be able to, if you're worried about your grade in the course, eke out a little bit more. If this is the first you're noticing the forums, all of the forums are still open, right? And I do this partially because all of the material relates to all of the material, right? So at the conclusion, when you're reading the problem of Socrates, all of a sudden something might occur to you, oh my god, I never noticed that about Socrates before, so you might like to chip back at the Socrates forum, right? But nonetheless, you still at this point have control over like 40% of your grade. Do your best on this exam. Try to be as clear and as complete with your answers as possible. If you're struggling with the material, the forums are there for your use. I did have a couple of issues with the forum participation where people started to expand beyond the scope of the analysis of the material. The forums are there specifically for you to analyze the material. They're a learning resource, right? And not a sort of personal debate resource. So with regard to that, I want you to just consider carefully how you respond to the topics or how you present the topics in the forum discussions. So, but nonetheless, that's there. Perfectly acceptable sorts of questions are, I really don't understand this element. I understand when Kierkegaard says human being is spirit, but what is spirit? Spirit is the self. But what is the self? I don't get this relation that relates itself to itself, or is the relations relating itself to itself in the relation. What the heck's the difference? I don't get what's going on. So maybe students will be able to help one another with their understanding of the material. But the last thing I'll note that when you sit down to submit your responses, it should reflect your own work and be in your own words. I mention this only because at one point in one of these classes that I was teaching, I had 2 identical final exams submitted, right? So I opened, I graded John Smith final exam, and closed it, and then opened the next one from Joe Jones, right? And in the upper right-hand corner of the margin, it still said John Smith final exam, and it was nearly word for word the same. That's not acceptable. But collaborating, I never would have made it through one of these philosophy courses without discussing the material with my contemporaries. That's the wonderful thing about these classes. It's one big reading group. We're all concerned with the same material. So, in closing, I hope you managed to take a lot out of this course. I look forward to reading your final exams. I understand that this material, it's heavy stuff, it's deep stuff, and like I say, I've got the hairline to prove it, right? So, if you need anything, give an email. I will be checking my email before the due date for the final exam. And enjoy writing. I hope to enjoy reading. All right, thank you, and have a wonderful time.